Well, hello again. Uh, want to spend a little time today on this short presentation to bring some things to your attention in regards to the subject of debt. Uh, by this time, you should have realized that debt is a four-letter word, and so it seems to be something that keeps coming up and bothering everybody. So I thought I'd make a few comments and point you in certain directions that might be useful to you. My favorite old line that I like to use, the old joke that I like to use is that one time I went to the doctor and I told the doctor, I said, Doc, every time I do this, I said it hurts. And the doctor said, don't do that. And so we can kind of translate that into many of our experiences we have from day to day, especially in regards to debt. Uh, don't do that. I was kind of, at just a humorous side note, I was watching on the some of the YouTube things, some old clips from some of the old comedy shows. In particular, I was watching one short clip from Bob Newhart. Now, many of you may not be old enough to remember watching Bob Newhart show, but it was really a funny program, especially for the times. Anyway, in this one particular segment, Bob in this program is a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You know, he takes patients in, he helps them in his own way. But in any event, in this one particular presentation, a lady came in, a new client came in, so they were discussing the opportunity, you know, for counseling and whatnot. So anyway, it's kind of humorous. But anyway, she said, "Well, what are the conditions of it?" And he says, "Well, he said it's $5 for 5 minutes." And she said, "Wow, that sounds like a great deal." She said, "Don't you think we need more than 5 minutes?" He said, "I doubt it." Anyway, they got down into a discussion. Finally, come down to Bob asking the lady, well, "What seems to be your problem?" She said she had this fear of being buried alive in a box, and so Bob said, "Well, that's easy enough to solve." He said I can solve that with 2 words. She said, "Really?" So she got out her notebook and was going to write down these 2 words that he was going to tell to her that was going to solve this terrible psychological problem. So he said, "Are you ready?" She said, "Yeah." He said, "Stop it." And she was taken back by it, you know. And so as the therapy progressed all through the thing, you know, his resolution to all the situations and problems that she was having was simply stop it. Now that's not usually what a psychologist does, but that was Bob Newhart's routine and so forth. So eventually they got down to the 3 minute mark, and pretty much she was exasperated by them, by his treatment and so forth. He said, "Well, you got 2 more minutes," because he wasn't going to make change. All she had was a $5 bill, and for 3 minutes is only $3. So she had $2, and he wasn't going to make change. She said, "Well, if I got to pay the full five," she said, "I might as well go ahead and go for the remaining 2 minutes," which she wished she hadn't done because it kept going down to the same thing. Bob just say, "Well, stop it," whatever problem she had. And so finally, at the end of the 5 minutes, she was so exasperated, so upset, with what he told her that she didn't come back. And so I think pretty much it's the same thing with a lot of things that we get involved in, especially as it regards debt. Stop it, is the solution to the problem. So we don't encourage people to go into debt. Now there's certain uh, thought processes about that. For instance, all commerce is actually done in debt, and so it's something that we have to deal with. But there's certain ways to deal with it, and certain ways to resolve problems that you may not be aware of. So that's what I've done for the last number of years. As solutions in commerce is to give you different knowledge and information about the nature of debt and how to resolve some of these debts in the various situations that you find yourself in. So that's uh, the gist of this little short presentation here. It won't be very long. Certainly you'll need to do a lot of study on your own or study into the seminars and whatnot that we've done in the past so you get a full understanding of some of these concepts. But I just wanted to point out some things to you, food for thought, as you consider this thing called debt. Now, I went into, just for the heck of it, went to Black's Law Dictionary and looked up the word debt. Uh, and what Black's sixth edition says about it, it says a sum of money due by certain and express agreement. A specified sum of money owing to one person from another, including not only obligation of debtor to pay, but right of creditor to receive and enforce payment. That's what Black's had to say about it. As you know, Black's Law Dictionary is basically a commercial dictionary. However uh, questionable that is. But in any event, that's one definition that's been applied to it. Now you could spend a week just studying the words that are used in that definition, and I would encourage you to do so. And I'm going to analyze a little bit of it here, just for your to get you kind of started looking at some of these things. For instance, if you're looking at definition, they use the word uh, agreement. They don't use the word contract. They use the word agreement. Now that should put you on to something pretty quick. I mean, you should obviously see that when you're dealing with agreements that you're operating in admiralty jurisdiction. All right, so they don't use a contract, they use the word agreement. One of the things that should be obvious, they say specify sum of money owing to one person, owing to a person, to another person. Are you getting that now? Certainly, those who've been around a little while, will easily make those distinctions when you start to look at the words that are actually being used in that definition. So this is important. And I like to address the terms also that they use, which I believe are being used improperly, and that is the word pay and payment. Now those words do not exist uh, in the fiction world. I mean, we use them, generally and loosely and so forth, but certainly for those of you who've been students for a while, when you start to talk about the use of those words, you recognize immediately that they do not apply. Because again, since 1933 and since the introduction of the concept of public policy, and certainly with House Joint Resolution 192, you realize in a heartbeat, that those words in that definition are being used improperly. Now, the reason for this is that the verb to pay, it denotes an exchange, something for something. See, so that's what to pay is to give something for something. And as you find out, as we look down the hill a little bit further, you'll realize why that cannot be. Uh, what you should understand is that when we're working in the public, uh, we're not talking about payment. We're not talking about paying. We're talking about transferring. Transfer. When you do, for instance, when you do a purchase, you're doing a transfer. So you're not paying for anything because you can't pay for it. It's against public policy. And so we're talking about when we talk about transfer, we're talking about the transfer of liability. Transfer of liability from one party to the other, and I'll describe that a little bit more fully here just in a second. Anyway, as I mentioned, exchange is characterized by consideration in both directions. In other words, both parties get something for something. And so, but that's not the case when you talk about transfer. Transfer is consideration in only one direction. See, and that's why we can't contract in the full sense of the word, because we can't give something for something. We can only give something in one direction only. And so we're talking about transfer, we're talking about purchase, and we start talking about those things. All right, so obviously then the concepts of buying and selling do not exist in our present commercial world. It's so again, it's only transfer of liability on title to a thing that's being negotiated. So get your words collected up in your mind so your thought process will be correct. Uh, let's see. Uh, this is kind of interesting, especially when you get into the world of real estate and mortgages and all that foolishness. You'll see how this applies because when you get into a real estate deal, as it were, and you go to closing or whatever it is, and all those kind of things people talk about, uh, the only thing that's happening there is transfer of liability on the title. It has absolutely nothing to do with the possession of the house or the thing or whatever it might be. You're only talking about transfer of liability on the title. So when you get into a real estate deal, as it were, you're not buying a house. Repeat, you are not buying a house. The only thing you're doing is purchasing a lien position on the title. That's all you're doing when you get into a real estate deal. You're transferring liability, and purchasing a lien position on the title, and that's all you're doing. You're not buying, you're not selling, you're not doing any of that kind of stuff. Now, the real question that you have to ask yourself is when you do this purchase, you do this purchase agreement on this real estate, uh, what lien position are you in? Are you in the first lien position? No. Second lien position? No. Maybe third lien position? Probably not. You're way down the line. You're way down the line as far as lien position on that title. Now, this should be obvious to you. uh, so let's say you go out here and purchase a house, you move into it, blah, blah, blah. You think you own the house. uh, then all of a sudden you don't pay the property tax. What happens? Well, the county will come in and foreclose on the property, sell it, and kick you out of it. So does that give you the idea that you bought that house? You didn't buy the house. You simply got into a lien position on the title. Otherwise, the county couldn't come in and foreclose it because if you were in first lien position, I mean they would have to wait their turn, so to speak. Anyway, uh, uh, you should be aware. Now, over the years, hey, listen, folks, there's got to be at least 50 ways to skin a cat. And over the years, you know, we have, or I have, and a lot of other people across the country have developed technologies to deal with some of these mortgage foreclosures. And I think some of you perhaps have listened to some of the presentations I've made on that. But anyway, one of the first things that comes up, obviously, is the fraud. The whole thing's done in fraud. And what does fraud do to any contract? So it avoids it. And so, I had a friend that went through a mortgage contract one time, and he had years and years experience in title and escrow and so forth. He showed me 26 items of fraud in the standard mortgage contract. So, so those things anyway, right from the get-go, and once you discover the fraud and so forth, then you can deal with it on that level. But anyway, is this the way it is with everything else in the public? Yes, with a little bit of description here, because in a moment we're going to talk about secured versus unsecured debt. A mortgage is a fact and a secured debt, but there's also the other thing which is called unsecured debt. Now, is there anything that goes on in our world that doesn't fall under this? And the answer to that is yes. But you're going to have to get into a study and conceptualize the original issue. Now, we don't have time today to talk about original issue. We've talked about it several other times, different places, and perhaps I'll get a chance maybe later on to bring some of that up. But anyway, yeah, there is. You can buy and sell original issue. You can do exchange in both directions. You can do consideration in both directions. And so anyway, that's something you need to uh, take a look at. Uh, One of the things that people, simply can't get their minds wrapped around, it has to do with non-cash items. You see, one of the things that people have failed to do is to study money. I mean, how many different kinds of money are there? Well, there's all kinds of money that's in use. I mean, and it's money because we're able to use that to transact business and so forth. But anyway, most of the things that give people problems is what we call non-cash items. Now, technically, purchase is in fact a non-cash transaction. It really is. It just the people get duped into thinking, that somehow cash itself is involved in any kind of purchase, but it's not. Only as you allow it. Well, certainly on a practical basis. I mean, you go down here to the fast food place, you order a hamburger and fries, and you give them $6 or $7 in cash. So, from a practical basis, a lot of times we use cash, but a lot of people don't use cash. I mean, they run those plastic cards and whatnot. So, so that hamburger and fries is actually a non-cash item if you know what your remedy is in regards to that credit card or that piece of plastic and so forth. But anyway, for the most part, I think you need to start to study the concept of cash versus non-cash items. I've seen a great deal of confusion about this, uh, from several different directions. People get confused about that. Anyway, work it out. Uh, let's see. Also, probably along with your study of money and the cash versus non-cash items and so forth, certainly you should be looking into the difference between open and closed accounts. They're entirely different things. And so many of the concepts that you have about debt in particular, uh, have your study of some of these other ancillary, actually they're really principal to the study. But if you go and study some of those things and get it worked out in your mind so you understand what some of those things are, I think you'll be a whole lot further along in your studies. Now, there's a variety of different kinds of debt. Basically, it comes down to the question, is the debt secured by collateral? And so a debt that is secured by collateral is what's known as uh, oh, how do I have it here? Well, it's basically a secured debt. Now, some of the other debts you're involved in are unsecured, which means there's been no collateral which has been put up, which could be collected against upon default of contract. And, like for instance, a mortgage is a secured debt. A car loan, that's a secured debt. But for instance, unsecured debt might be a phone bill, credit card, uh, a court judgment, a civil judgment. So all those things are unsecured debt. So so you need to go and study that. Okay. Now, one of the things that you're going to need to work on, because this has international implications. I mean, we got local debts. You got personal debts, as you call it, and so forth and so on. But debt is a something that the whole world deals with, and not just down here. Buying hamburgers down at the fast food joint. I mean, we're talking about the highest levels of banking are dealing with these debt issues. And so one of the things that I've tried to stress over the years is that uh, in order to be a valid debt, it has to be redeemable. Now, how many times have we gone over this? I mean, I've given you a lot of situations to make this understand. For instance, a lot of people are doing commercial documents, liens, and I've always told you that in order for that commercial lien or that administrative process that you're doing to be valid, it has to be collectible. And if it's not collectible, you're wasting your time. So these are things you have to understand. So now talking about the world of money and these debts and so forth, that we're operating with. The question is the debt redeemable? Is the currency redeemable? And if it's not, then it doesn't exist in our commercial world and so forth. Now, a lot of you will remember when we first started all this study of these things and so forth, we were talking, I think Roger and some of the ones around him were saying, well, what shall we call what we're doing? And they finally came up with a term which had real relevance, which is basically, we'll call this what we're doing commercial redemption. So you see how important that redemption is. And certainly for those who have studied the Christian religion and understand the difference between the Old and the New Testament and so forth, you understand the necessity of a redeemer. In other words, the whole theology that's outlined, the Judaic Christian thought process and so forth is useless without the concept of redemption of sin, or in commerce we say redemption of debt. And so without a redemption, then the debt or the sin and so forth has no value. So, and we see this. For those of you who are not following the international things that are going on, you know, in the last number of years, the Queen's Council or the Swiss or whoever it is that runs that place over there have come up with some banking regulations known as the Basel Agreements, the most recent of which is the Basel III Agreement, which is now enforceable, which basically is forcing the banks and financial institutions and so forth to become transparent. And that means that they have to prove up on any money they're claiming. You understand that because of all the illegal trading across the planet and so forth, they have created massive amounts of what's known as toxic derivatives. Now, these toxic derivatives have brought us onto the brink of financial collapse on the planet. And so measures are being taken to deal with those things. And basically what it amounts to is to bring all these what's called off-ledger accounts into transparency so they can be validated. Now, if they are valid, then they're good. If they're not, if if they can't validate the source and the creation of that money, then they're being disallowed, taken back out of the accounts and so forth. So this Basel III is an important thing internationally, but what effect does that have on you? Well, think about this for a minute. If you go back and review what happened when you got involved in that mortgage contract and so forth, the note you gave appeared on the ledger on the account payable side. And on the account payable side, the note is an asset to you and a liability to the bank. But on the account receivable side, that same note is a liability to you and an asset to the bank. And so what the banks have done to prevent the zeroing of that account is they take the account payable side off ledger so it does not appear where anybody can see it. And so the only thing they're acting upon then, of course, is the account receivable, which shows you as a debtor. If they brought the account payable side back, it would show you as a creditor. So we have all these problems that we're dealing with, and eventually I would suppose that if and when Basel III actually filters down to our commercial banks in the country and so forth, that the adjustment of all those accounts will be accommodated by bringing the account payable back on ledger, which demonstrates a zero balance, you see. So anyway, we work on these things. Some of the different ones have used this thought process in dealing with mortgages. And they go in, for instance, into a mortgage situation in a court, and they subpoena the account payable on that account. And just as soon as that account payable shows up, that demonstrates that there's a zero balance. And so all it amounts to is there is no debt on that mortgage because of the promissory note. Anyway, like I say, there's 50 ways to skin a cat. But anyway, over the years, what we've done with solutions in commerce is try to address the various problems that folks have come into in regards to debt, both secured and unsecured debts. I mean, we've spent a lot of time working on acceptance for value. Uh, I mean, we've worked on numerous methods of dealing with mortgages, secured loans, and so forth and so on. And yes, of course, we've spent time dealing with third-party debt collectors, or what I call ambulance chasers. And yeah, we even I think we did a single topic DVD on third-party debt collectors. And so anyway, there's been a great deal of effort, a great deal of work that's been put into making these presentations so you would have this information and could utilize it. And that's what I encourage you to do. I mean, I can do a short blurb here on YouTube or whatever, just to make you aware of some of the circumstances and so forth. But I like Bob Newhart's approach when it comes to the question of debt. Stop it, and I think you'll be a whole lot happier.